Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Beauty and the Beasts, the place where we soothe our skin and shake our souls. I am your host, Megan, and today we are diving into some serious skincare self-care, while also diving headfirst into a chilling mystery from Korea. So get comfy, pull your hair back, and grab your favorite toner, face mask, or whatever you have, because tonight I will be telling you a spine-tingling story about one of Korea's most mysterious rivers, the Hongcheon River, which is located in Gangwon Province. So this river, on the surface, it's all peace, nature, and beauty. But beneath that calm water flows a terrifying legend. One man's relaxing camping trip turned into a nightmare. And what he encountered might just make you think twice before going near the water at night. So let's get started. So there was this old man sitting by the Hongcheon River, and he starts telling this story. He leans in, voice low, like he's unlocking some old memory from a dusty box. He says, "A woman from Seoul died here. She was wearing red stiletto heels. She slipped and just drowned in the river." And then he keeps going, almost too calmly. After she died, more people started dying too. The villagers started whispering, saying ghosts were taking them. The way he said it wasn't dramatic or anything. It was eerie because of how calm he was. Like he wasn't even surprised anymore. Maybe he had seen too much, or maybe he was hiding something. And after that, he just stared out at the water, didn't say another word, just kept watching the river like he was waiting for something to rise from it. Anyway, this guy, Young-woo, who runs a travel blog, decided to take a trip out there. He had been stuck in the grind of city life, hadn't traveled in ages, and a friend told him the Hongcheon River was the perfect escape. Beautiful, peaceful, sounded like a dream, right? The river was famous for its crystal clear water. People loved going there to fish, swim, just relax. So of course, Young was thought, perfect for the blog. I will take some great photos, write a nice post, recharge a bit. So off he goes. He packs up for the weekend and heads to this riverside campsite. And honestly, when he got there, it looked like a postcard. The water shimmered like emerald glass, and mountains were thick with trees, and everything felt so calm. Young even thought, wow, I could stay here for days. That first day went great. He set up his tent, grilled some barbecue, tossed his fishing line into the river, just soaking in that peaceful vibe. But later that night, something weird happened. The campground manager came up to him and said, "You're from Seoul, right?" And Young nodded, "Yeah." And then the guy leaned in and said, "You probably haven't heard, but something strange has been happening around here lately. Don't go near the river at night. I mean it. Whatever you do, stay away from the water after dark." And he said it like it was life or death, repeated it several times, almost begging him. Young-woo just smiled politely and nodded along, but in his head, he was like, come on, I'm not a kid. He figured this guy was just trying to scare him for fun, or maybe it was some weird local superstition. But as soon as the manager walked away, Young realized something. That man's face, it wasn't just serious, it was pale, like he had seen something. And even though he tried to brush it off, Young-woo felt the sudden cold shiver crawl up his back, like something was watching him from the darkness, just beyond the trees. Anyways, that night, Even though Youngwoo had a weird feeling in the back of his mind, he kind of just shrugged off the manager's warning. You know how it is. Once you're around people, chatting, laughing, it's just easy to forget that spooky stuff. Everyone gathered around the campfire, sitting in small groups, roasting food and sharing stories. The mood was warm and light, and soon enough, it was time for lights off. But the second the lights went off, the whole vibe shifted. I mean, instantly. The river that had looked so calm and peaceful earlier suddenly felt dark and heavy, like it was hiding something beneath the surface. And that is when Youngwoo suddenly froze. He thought, oh crap, I left my fishing rod. And he had completely forgotten about it, left it earlier by the riverbank. Now, normally he wouldn't have hesitated to go grab it, but for some reason, that night, something just felt off, like really off. He couldn't explain it, just this low, gnawing unease in his gut, and he shouldn't have gone there. But it was brand new gear, stuff he had just bought for this trip. He couldn't just leave it out there overnight, especially not with strangers around. So he sighed, grabbed his lantern, and carefully stepped out of the tent. Most of the campground was pitch black by then. Only a few dim safety lights flickered in the distance. And the closer he got to the river, the darker it got. Even the safety lights seemed to fade somehow, like the darkness was swallowing them whole. Feeling uneasy, Youngwoo started humming to himself. You know how people do that, right? Like trying to pretend everything's fine, but the shadows from the trees, they were dancing in the wind, and some of them looked way too human-shaped for comfort. Even the sound of the river felt different now, less relaxing, more sinister. Still, he kept walking, shaking his head. Come on, stop being a baby, he told himself. He finally reached the spot where he had left the gear. He started picking it up when suddenly he heard something. Splash, splash, splash. The sound of water splashing. His head snapped toward the water. And there it was. A silhouette just floating out on the surface. What the hell is that? His heart started pounding, but something, curiosity, maybe stupidity, pushed him closer. Step by step, he edged toward the water. And when he got close enough to see it clearly, it was just a plastic bag. Probably some garbage someone tossed from the campground. Youngwoo let out this nervous laugh. God, I am such an idiot, he muttered. And a grown-up man getting scared over a floating trash bag, that was embarrassing. But even as he tried to brush it off, that uneasy feeling wouldn't leave him. His skin still crawled. He kept glancing back at the river because it felt like something was watching him. Not a person, not an animal, something. He shook it off and headed back to his tent, trying not to look back. And that is how his first night at the Hongcheon River ended. Not with a ghost sighting, but with a plastic bag and a heavy dose of paranoia. Or at least that's what he thought. The next day, everything felt normal again. Youngwoo spent the afternoon sightseeing, snapping photos for his blog, checking out the nearby trails and scenic spots. And that eerie feeling from the night before, it sort of faded into the background. Just one of those weird moments, right? But then, night came again. He was back in his tent, winding down, eyes heavy from the day's adventures. He glanced at his phone. It was just past midnight. The whole campsite was quiet. Half asleep, just about to drift off, and then he heard it. A sound, but not like bugs chirping or trees rustling. No, this sound was different. It sounded like a voice, faint, really faint voice. So soft, he couldn't even be sure. at first if he was hearing it right. Sometimes it sounded like a woman, other times like a baby. But either way, it was definitely a voice of a human being. And then came the words, "Help me." Each syllable dragged out, slow and broken, like someone struggling to speak. Youngwoo's eyes flew open. His heart jumped. What the hell was that? He bolted out of his tent, lantern in hand, scanning the area. There was no one out there. Not a single sound, not a single movement, just the dark, silent tents of other campers. Everyone else had clearly gone to bed early, probably wiped out from the day, just like him. He wondered, could it have been someone playing a prank? Maybe the manager, maybe some camper trying to scare people. But it didn't feel like that. It didn't feel like a joke. Still, there was nothing he could do. He went back into his tent. But sleep, that was not happening. And that voice kept echoing in his head, and every now and then he thought he heard it again. "Help me." Eventually, near dawn, his exhaustion took over, and he passed out. The next morning, he sat up in his tent feeling groggy and torn. He was supposed to stay another day, and he had even pre-booked it. But after what happened last night, he wasn't so sure anymore. Something didn't sit right. And just then, he bumped into the campground manager again. The guy took one look at Youngwoo's face and said, "You heard something strange last night, didn't you?" Youngwoo blinked. "Wait, how did you know?" The manager sighed, like he had seen this a dozen times before. There was an accident here years ago. A group came out during summer, just like you, and one of them got swept away by the current. Youngwoo frowned. "You mean they drowned?" "Yeah," the manager said quietly, but the body didn't turn up right away. It just vanished. And that gave Youngwoo chills. "What do you mean vanished?" He said the body was found later, way downstream, like miles from here. But the weird thing is, his friends all swore that he didn't just fall in. They said something pulled him under. And Youngwoo just stood there, goosebumps rising on his arms. Pulled under. Something about that phrase just stuck in his mind. But here's the thing, it wasn't just a one-time freak accident. The manager told Youngwoo that there had been dozens of similar incidents over the years. People just disappearing, drowning, get pulled under when there was no current strong enough to explain it. And Youngwoo freaked out, but curious, pulled out his phone and started Googling right then and there. And sure enough, he found article after article. The Hongcheon River was actually known for being one of the most accident-prone waterways in the region. Not exactly the kind of information you find on a travel brochure. But the manager wasn't done. He leaned in and said, "People say a vengeful spirit still roams the river. That at night, if you listen closely, you might hear someone calling your name from the water." And that sent a shiver down Youngwoo's spine. He couldn't help but think back to that whisper he heard the night before. That voice saying, "Help me," it wasn't just in his head, not anymore. For a second, he considered packing up and leaving right then and there. But then he remembered his blog. I mean, come on, what a story this would make, right? He thought, if I post this, it will blow up. People love this kind of creepy story. So, he stayed one more night, just out of curiosity. And that evening, the final night, everything felt normal. Youngwoo lit a campfire again, sat around with a few other campers, shared stories, laughed, drank a little. and nothing happened. And he started to think that maybe he had imagined it all. Maybe it was just the power of suggestion, But just as he was starting to relax, he felt something, a cold shiver right behind him, like something just brushed past his back. He whipped around, but there was nothing, just the sound of the river, calm and steady. Still, he couldn't shake the chill. Eventually, he went to bed, and at first, nothing happened. But then he started dreaming. In the dream, he was in this river, not near it, in it. He was floating. The river was cold, and then something grabbed him, something down there. It wrapped tightly around his ankle, yanking him downward. He tried to scream, but water flooded his mouth. His lungs burned. His vision started to blur. And then something soft wrapped around his fingers. Hair, long, wet strands of hair. And just like that, he heard it again. That voice, "Help me, help me." Over and over, echoing in the dark water. Young jolted awake, soaked in cold sweat, gasping for air like he had actually been drowning. He looked around. The tent was quiet, still, nothing out of place. But then, a smell, just for a second. That damp, fishy scent, like something from deep underwater, had been right there in the tent with him. And that was the part that scared him the most. Even if it was just a dream, it felt like something had actually been inside the tent, like it had left just as he woke up. The next morning, he was absolutely drained, pale, shaky. He hadn't really slept. And now he didn't even care about the blog anymore. All he wanted was to go home. But one question still burned in his mind. Was there really something there? Before packing up, he decided to take one last look around. He pulled out his phone, opened the camera, and cautiously walked along the riverbank. Just one more time. So, Young-woo starts walking along the riverbank, camera in hand, scanning the water one last time. At first, everything looked normal, picture perfect even. The water was calm and clear, gently flowing under the morning sun. A few campers nearby were fishing, laughing, splashing around like nothing ever happened. Just another peaceful day. But then he got to that spot, that one particular stretch of riverbank, and suddenly his phone camera started glitching, shaking, struggling to focus, the screen flickering like crazy. So he muttered to himself, like, what the hell? He wiped the lens, tried tapping the screen, but nothing helped. The camera just wouldn't lock focus. And then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something floating. At first, he thought it was debris, but when he turned to look properly, his heart nearly stopped. It looked like a woman, long black hair, wet and heavy, drifting just above the surface. Her shape limp, exactly like what you would imagine a drowned body would look like. Young froze. His throat tightened. He just couldn't breathe. And the camera, it was useless. The screen kept shaking like it didn't want to capture whatever he was seeing. And then that smell hit him, that same fishy, damp, foul stench from before, thick in the air, strong enough to make his stomach churn. But here's the weirdest part. No one else reacted. The campers around him kept fishing, laughing, completely unaware that something horrifying was just there, floating right in front of them. And that is when panic finally kicked in. Young turned and bolted. He didn't even look back. He ran straight to his tent, hands shaking, heart pounding, threw all his gear into his bags, barely thinking straight. But as soon as he started walking away from the river, just a few steps further, everything got lighter. The dizziness faded. Eventually, he told his friends he had an emergency and needed to leave early. No time for goodbyes. He just jumped in his car and sped off. And once he was about 1 kilometer away from the campsite, the dizziness, the foggy head, the nausea, completely gone. When he got home, Young-woo tried to make sense of it all. He wrote everything down, his whole Hongcheon River experience, and posted it online. Thinking maybe people would find it interesting. And they did, but not in a way he expected. Strange comments started pouring in. Let's go back again. Why didn't you go into the water? I think it's still waiting for you in the river. At first he thought it was just trolls, creepy little jokes from people who love ghost stories. But then it got worse. Someone started sending him photos. Edited ones, using pictures he uploaded to his blog. The photos were twisted, darkened, distorted, and some showed things that weren't there before. One image showed the river, but with a faint, ghostly face hovering above the water. A woman's face, pale and expressionless. And scrawled across the image was a sentence that made Young's blood run cold. "This is the photo you took." He tried replying to the email, but there was no sender. The address didn't exist. And after that, he couldn't take it anymore. He deleted everything. The blog he built over a year, gone. He was too terrified to keep going. And here is the chilling part. Locals in that area, they have heard stories like this before. Some say they used to be a village nearby years ago, completely wiped out by a flood, and the spirits of those who drowned were still lingering beneath the river. And that is why people sometimes swear they see human shapes in the water, or why someone will randomly fall in late at night, right after calling out to the river like they're speaking to someone. After all of that, Young-woo was never the same. He started getting anxiety just being near water. Even a swimming pool would make his skin crawl. He would wake up sweating from nightmares, sometimes even scream in the shower, saying it felt like someone grabbed his ankle. His life started unraveling. Doctors couldn't explain it, gave him meditation, but the symptoms just kept coming back. Eventually, he went to see a shaman. The shaman didn't even hesitate. As soon as Young walked in, the shaman looked him dead in the eyes and said, "A water spirit has latched onto you. You've seen a water ghost before, haven't you?" He didn't even have to explain what happened. The shaman already knew. According to the shaman, this wasn't just any spirit. It was something called a susalgi, which means a water spirit ghost. Apparently, among all the evil spirits out there, the susalgi is one of the most dangerous. It is said to be a restless soul, trapped in the very place it drowned, cursed to remain in the water forever. But it's not just stuck there. It wants revenge. They say the susalgi drags people under, makes them drown so it won't be alone. And if it's strong enough, it doesn't just whisper from the water's edge. It can physically pull you in. The shaman looked carefully at Young-woo and said, "I will make you a talisman. Keep it on you, especially near water. Don't take it off, just for 1 year. And that is all I ask." Young-woo nodded, hands trembling, and he took the talisman. And strangely enough, after that, the nightmares stopped. The sensation of something grabbing his ankle vanished. The stench, the hallucinations, the cold sweats, all gone. But still, what was it that he saw in that river? was it truly a water spirit? Or was it just some trick of the eye, just a shadow, a floating object, some psychological prank played by his own fear? No one can say for sure. But what we do know is that stories like these, they have been told in Korea for generations. Stories of spirits haunting rivers, lakes, wells, any place touched by water and death. People disappearing, voices calling from the dark, cold hands reaching up from the deep. And sometimes what seems like just another peaceful getaway hides something darker beneath the surface. Maybe it was all coincidence. Maybe it was just fear playing tricks on Youngwoo's mind. But if you ever find yourself by the Hongcheon River and you hear a faint voice calling from the water, don't look back, don't answer, and whatever you do, don't go near the edge, because once something from the water sets its eyes on you, it never lets go. And that is the end of today's story. What a wild, creepy ride, right? I will be back soon with more spine-chilling tales, so make sure to stick around. And until then, sleep tight and don't let any water spirits visit you tonight. Good night, guys.